Hello guys, this is your friend Itachi Fanfic 3.0 and we are back a new fanfic story which is, what if Naruto Shippuden showed Naruto choosing Sakura over his dream of becoming Hokage? Part 1. Let's start fanfic without wasting more time. The world had always asked him to run forward. From the moment he could remember, the boy had been told that moving ahead was the only way to survive. Run faster than loneliness. Run louder than doubt. Run so far that pain could not catch up. He had learned to smile while doing it, learned to laugh when his chest ached, learned to pretend that being alone was a choice rather than a consequence. But that night, for the first time in years, he stopped running. He stood still, letting the quiet press against him, letting the truth finally settle into his bones. The village slept, unaware of how much it had taken from him and how much it had given back in return. The streets were familiar, yet distant, like memories that no longer belonged to him. Every step he had taken in his life had been toward becoming stronger, toward being acknowledged, toward protecting everyone else. Yet now, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something unfinished. She found him like that. She always did. She didn't call his name at first. She didn't need to. She had learned long ago that some moments were too fragile to be disturbed by words. Instead, she stood behind him, close enough to feel his warmth, close enough to remind him that he was not alone even when he felt like he was. Her presence was gentle, but it carried the strength of someone who had endured quietly for years. When she finally stepped closer, he turned, surprised not by her arrival but by how relieved he felt seeing her. Her pink hair framed her face softly, moving slightly as if even it was hesitant to break the silence. Her eyes, steady and sincere, held everything she had never fully said aloud. She reached for him before doubt could return. Her hand touched his cheek, and the world narrowed to that single contact. It was not dramatic. It was not rushed. It was simply honest. For years, she had watched him chase dreams that seemed bigger than himself. She had watched him fail, fall, rise again, and smile through wounds that never truly healed. She had stood beside him in battles where fear should have won and had patched him up afterward, both physically and emotionally, even when he pretended he didn't need it. She had loved him in silence longer than she cared to admit. And he had needed her longer than he had ever realized. When she leaned forward and pressed her lips against his, it was not a declaration meant for the world. It was a promise meant only for the two of them. A promise that said, "I am here. I stayed. I am not leaving." His arms wrapped around her instinctively, as if his body understood what his mind had been too stubborn to accept. He held her as though letting go might cause her to disappear like so many things he had lost before. His grip was careful, protective, and full of a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. For the first time, he did not feel like he had to be strong. For the first time, he felt allowed to be human. Memories surfaced uninvited. The first time they had met, when annoyance and rivalry had masked curiosity. The countless arguments that had ended with mutual understanding rather than victory. The moments when she had scolded him for being reckless, only to stay up all night making sure he survived the consequences of his recklessness. He realized something then, something painfully simple. She had always been part of his journey. Not as a destination, but as the constant presence that made the journey bearable. She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. She was not asking for anything. She was not demanding answers or promises he wasn't ready to give. She was offering him truth, raw and unguarded. "I don't need you to choose me," her silence seemed to say. "I just need you to stop leaving yourself behind." He rested his forehead against hers, breathing slowly, letting the moment anchor him. The future loomed ahead, uncertain and heavy with responsibility. There were still battles to fight, expectations to meet, roles to fulfill. The world would continue to ask him to sacrifice parts of himself. But now, he knew something he hadn't before. He didn't have to do it alone. That realization frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Because loving someone meant having something to lose. And yet, as he held her, he understood that some losses were worth the risk, because without them, victory would feel empty. She stayed in his arms, unafraid of his silence, untroubled by the uncertainty of tomorrow. She had waited this long. She could wait a little longer. What mattered was that he was finally present. Not chasing, not proving, not escaping. Just there. Together. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet vow formed. Not spoken, not shouted, but stronger than any promise he had ever made. No matter how far the road ahead stretched, no matter how heavy the title he would one day carry, he would return to this feeling. To her. Because strength was never about standing alone. It was about knowing who would still be there when the fighting stopped. Time did not move forward after that moment. It stretched, bent, and softened, as if the world itself understood that rushing would only ruin what was unfolding between them. He kept his arms around her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, noticing how perfectly it aligned with his own once he stopped forcing himself to stay alert. For so long, his body had been trained to react. To danger, to expectations, to the cries of others. Now it reacted to something quieter, something far more terrifying than battle. Peace. Her fingers curled slightly into the fabric of his jacket, not gripping tightly, but enough to confirm that this was real. She wasn't fading. She wasn't a memory. She wasn't a dream created by exhaustion or longing. She was here. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the darkness behind his eyelids did not bring back screams, failures, or faces he could not save. Instead, it brought fragments of moments he had ignored before. Her laughter when he said something foolish. Her frustration when he pushed himself too far. Her quiet pride whenever he succeeded, even when she pretended to be unimpressed. He had always believed love was something loud. Grand confessions, dramatic sacrifices, gestures that could shake the world. He had thought it had to be earned through pain, proven through suffering. But this was different. This love had grown patiently in the background, like a light that never demanded attention but never went out either. She shifted slightly in his arms, resting her head against his chest. He felt the warmth spread through him, settling into places that had been cold for far too long. The boy who had once begged for acknowledgement, who had chased recognition with reckless determination, finally understood what he had truly been searching for. Not approval. Belonging. Her heartbeat was steady, calm, confident. It told a story of someone who had learned to endure without becoming bitter, someone who had chosen hope even when disappointment would have been easier. He realized then that while he had been fighting the world, she had been fighting herself, fighting doubt, fear, and the quiet voice that told her she might never be enough. Yet she had stayed. That knowledge weighed on him heavier than any responsibility he carried. He loosened his hold just enough to look at her again. Her eyes met his without hesitation. There was no accusation in them, no resentment for the times he had failed to notice her pain or appreciate her strength. There was only understanding, and that frightened him more than anger ever could. Because understanding meant forgiveness. And forgiveness meant he could no longer hide behind guilt. He wanted to speak. Words crowded his throat. Apologies for the times he had chosen the road over her. Explanations for the distance he had created. Promises about a future he wasn't sure he could control. But none of them felt right. Words suddenly seemed too fragile for something this real. So instead, he rested his hand gently against her back, grounding himself in the certainty of her presence. "I'm scared," he finally admitted, his voice low and unsteady, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. She didn't respond immediately. She simply listened, allowing the honesty to exist without judgment. When she did speak, her voice was calm, carrying a strength that came not from confidence but from acceptance. I know, she said softly. Those two words did more for him than any reassurance ever had. She wasn't denying his fear. She wasn't trying to fix it. She was acknowledging it, standing beside it, sharing the weight. I don't know how to be here, he continued, surprising himself with how easily the truth flowed now. I know how to fight. I know how to protect everyone else. But this, staying, choosing something for myself, I don't know how to do that. She lifted her head slightly, just enough to look at him fully. Her hand moved from his chest to his cheek again, thumb brushing gently against his skin, a gesture filled with both affection and resolve. Then learn, she said. The same way you learned everything else. There was no challenge in her tone, no demand. Just faith. Faith that he could grow beyond the version of himself shaped only by struggle. Faith that he was allowed to want something personal. Faith that he deserved it. The silence returned, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt full. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Duties waiting, conflicts unresolved, futures undecided. But within that quiet space between them, something fundamental had shifted. He realized then that love was not something that arrived after the journey was complete. It was something that walked alongside you, even when you tried to outrun it. He leaned forward again, resting his forehead against hers, breathing her in, committing the moment to memory. Whatever happened next, whatever sacrifices awaited him, this would remain his truth. Not the titles, not the expectations, not the battles, but this, the choice to stop running. And for the first time, he felt ready to take the next step, not forward alone, but together.